The cold, sterile air of the courtroom hangs heavy thick with unspoken resentment. A man, smug and victorious, leans over to his young fiancée, her hand deliberately placed on the table for all to see. A massive diamond glints under the fluorescent lights, a weapon in a war of silent humiliation. He looks to his ex-wife, expecting to see defeat, to see the pathetic crumble of the woman he left behind. But he sees nothing. What he doesn't know is that the real drama isn't about the past he destroyed, but the future she's quietly built, a future so spectacular it's about to make his petty display look like child's play and leave the entire courtroom, including the judge, utterly speechless. The divorce proceedings of Amelia Reed and Gregory Nash, docket number 734, were meant to be a quiet, unceremonious affair. The end of a 12-year marriage dissected and divided under the indifferent gaze of the state. But Gregory Nash had other plans. For him, this wasn't an ending. It was a victory lap. He sat at the respondent's table, a picture of tailored success. His charcoal Brioni suit was sharp enough to cut the tension in the room, his silver tie knotted with precision. Beside him sat not his lawyer, but his fiancée, Brooke Harrison. She was everything Amelia was not, a decade younger, with professionally highlighted blonde hair that cascaded over the shoulders of a tight baby pink dress. She was a living, breathing testament to Gregory's supposed upgrade. Amelia sat opposite them, a solitary figure in a modest navy blue dress. Her posture was straight, her hands clasped in her lap, her expression a careful mask of neutrality. Her lawyer, a sharp-witted woman named Ms. Chen, occasionally jotted notes, her face impassive. But Amelia could feel the eyes on her. Not just the curious stares of the few other people in the gallery, but the piercing, condescending gaze of the man she had once promised to love for eternity. "Mr. Nash," Judge Rosalind Davies began her voice, a low, tired baritone that had presided over thousands of such domestic tragedies. "We are here to finalize the division of assets and spousal support. Your financials have been submitted. Ms. Reed's have as well. There seems to be a significant disparity." Gregory smirked, a subtle, predatory curl of his lips. He leaned towards his lawyer, Mr. Peterson, a man whose slicked-back hair seemed to reflect his client's oily charm. They exchanged a confident murmur before Peterson stood up. "Your Honor," Peterson began, his voice booming with manufactured gravitas, "my client, Mr. Nash, has been more than generous. He has agreed to let Ms. Reed keep the 2018 sedan, her personal effects, and has offered a one-time settlement of $50,000. Given that Ms. Reed has no children, no mortgage to maintain on the marital home, which is being sold, and frankly, no significant career prospects, we believe this is an exceptionally fair offer." Each word was a carefully aimed dart. No significant career prospects. It was Gregory's favorite refrain, the mantra he had used to belittle her for years. Amelia's jaw tightened infinitesimally, the only outward sign of the storm brewing within her. Judge Davies peered over her spectacles. $50,000 after a 12-year marriage where Ms. Reed was the primary homemaker, forgoing her career to support Mr. Nash's business ventures. "A business he built from the ground up, Your Honor," Peterson countered smoothly. "Ms. Reed enjoyed a very comfortable lifestyle. My client believes this settlement will provide her with more than enough runway to get back on her feet." It was then that Gregory made his move. It was a piece of theatre rehearsed and timed for maximum impact. He reached over and took Brooke's left hand, lifting it as if it were a priceless artifact. He kissed her knuckles, his eyes locked on Amelia. "We just want this to be over." "Your Honor," Gregory said, his voice dripping with false sincerity. "So, my fiancée and I can begin our new life together." On Brooke's finger, a diamond flashed with aggressive brilliance. It was a 3-carat brilliant cut stone, set on a platinum band paved with smaller diamonds. It was loud, ostentatious, and undeniably expensive. It screamed new money and look at me. Brooke wiggled her fingers slightly, making the stone catch the light and scatter, tiny sharp rainbows across the polished wood of the table. A satisfied little smile played on her lips. The message was clear, delivered with the subtlety of a sledgehammer. I have moved on. I am wealthier, happier, and with someone younger and more beautiful. You are being paid off like a fired employee. A low murmur rippled through the courtroom. Even Judge Davies' professional mask seemed to flicker with a hint of distaste at the blatant display. She looked at Amelia, her expression softening with something that looked like pity. In the eyes of the court, Amelia was the classic tragic figure, the discarded wife left with scraps, while her ex-husband flaunted his new life and new fortune. Amelia felt the heat of humiliation creep up her neck. She could feel Gregory's satisfaction, a palpable force across the room. He wanted her to cry. He wanted her to scream, to look broken and defeated. It would be the final validation of his decision to leave her the proof that she was nothing without him. She took a slow, deliberate breath, holding the judge's pitying gaze. She didn't look at the ring. She didn't look at Brooke's smug face. She looked only at the judge, a silent plea to be seen as more than the victim in this carefully constructed play. Ms. Chen placed a calming hand on Amelia's arm for a moment before rising. Your Honor, my client appreciates Mr. Nash's performance. However, his assessment of her financial situation is, to put it mildly, out of date. We reject his offer. In fact, we will be withdrawing our request for spousal support entirely. The courtroom went silent. Gregory's smirk faltered, replaced by a flicker of confusion. Mr. Peterson blinked, thrown off his rhythm. Why would she withdraw the request? It was the only leverage she had. Judge Davies leaned forward, her interest piqued. On what grounds, Ms. Chen, has Ms. Reed suddenly come into an inheritance? Not an inheritance, Your Honor, Ms. Chen said, her voice clear and steady. A change in circumstance. A very significant one. Gregory scoffed audibly, a short, barking laugh. A change in circumstance. What did she finally sell? Some of her little watercolor paintings at a craft fair? The insult hung in the air, dripping with a decade of accumulated scorn. Amelia closed her eyes for a brief second, not in pain but to center herself. When she opened them, the mask of neutrality was gone. In its place was a quiet, unshakable calm, the calm before the storm. 12 years felt like a lifetime ago. Amelia met Gregory Nash, not in a boardroom or at a gala, but in a university library. She was a driven, passionate postgraduate student working on her PhD in art history. Her specialty was the provenance of Renaissance art, a field that required meticulous research, a keen eye, and a deep love for the stories objects could tell. He was an ambitious MBA student, all sharp angles and sharper ambition, who told her he loved her intellect. In the beginning, it was intoxicating. Gregory was a force of nature. He was charming, decisive, and he saw a world of opportunity. He was starting a real estate development company and spoke of building an empire. Amelia, lost in the quiet, dusty world of archives and museums, was swept away by his energy. He made her feel like a part of his grand vision. You're too smart to be stuck in a library, Amy, he'd say, using the diminutive name she disliked. With your eye for detail and aesthetics, you could help me. We could build this together. She believed him. She put her PhD on hold. Just for a year, she told herself to help him launch his company, Nash Properties. She helped design the interiors for his first few spec homes. Her taste was impeccable, creating spaces that felt both luxurious and lived in. The homes sold quickly and for a premium. 1 year turned into 2, then 5. Her dissertation gathered dust in a box in the attic. Gregory's company grew, and so did his ego. Her role shifted from a valued partner to an unpaid, unacknowledged assistant. She managed their increasingly complex social calendar, hosted dinners for potential investors, and oversaw the renovations of their own sprawling home in a wealthy suburb of Boston. The man who had once praised her intellect now openly mocked it. Art history. He'd laugh at dinner parties. Amelia was going to be a professor. Can you imagine arguing about who painted what cherub 500 years ago? I saved her from a life of poverty and tweed jackets. The guests would chuckle politely, and Amelia would smile, a tight, practiced smile. Each laugh was a small cut, bleeding her confidence away, drop by drop. He called her passions hobbies. Her desire to finish her degree was a cute little dream. He was the architect, not just of buildings, but of the beautiful, suffocating cage he had built around her. The breaking point was not a single dramatic event, but a slow, crushing realization. It came to a head on their 10th anniversary. Gregory had forgotten, but upon being reminded by his secretary, he had a gift delivered to the house. It was a necklace, a heavy gold chain, with a large generic diamond pendant. It was almost identical to the one he had given his top sales agent as a bonus the previous month. That evening, she found him in his study on the phone. His voice was low and intimate, a tone he hadn't used with her in years. He was talking to Brooke, a new intern, at his office. Of course, I'm coming to the party, gorgeous. I'll just have to get through this anniversary dinner first. Yeah, another year. Don't worry, it's just a formality now. He hung up and saw Amelia standing in the doorway. There was no panic in his eyes, no shame, just annoyance. What? He snapped. I heard you, Gregory, she said, her voice barely a whisper. He sighed, leaning back in his leather chair. Look, Amelia, let's be adults about this. Things haven't been working for a long time. You know that. You've become complacent. You have no drive. What do you even do all day? I run your life, she finally retorted, the words tearing out of her. I manage this house. I plan the events that secure your investors. I gave up my entire career for you. He actually laughed. Your career tracking down old paintings. That was never going to pay the bills. I gave you everything. This house, the cars, the clothes. You have a life other women would kill for, and you're complaining because you're bored. That was the moment the love died, replaced by a cold, hard clarity. She wasn't his partner. She was an asset, and a depreciating one at that. He didn't see her. He saw a line item on his personal balance sheet. She left the next day. She didn't make a scene. She packed 2 suitcases, took the sedan he'd so magnanimously let her keep, and moved into a small apartment she rented with the last of the savings from a premarital account her grandmother had left her. The first few months were a blur of grief and liberation. She was terrified and exhilarated. She enrolled in an online course to finish her PhD coursework. To support herself, she started a small online art advisory service, helping minor collectors verify and value their pieces. It was a pittance, barely enough to cover her rent and bills. It was during this time, buried in research for a client's minor 18th century landscape, that she stumbled upon something. An article in an obscure academic journal from years ago, written by a then unknown scholar, that proposed a radical new method for identifying the underdrawings of Northern Renaissance masters using multispectral imaging. The scholar's name was Amelia Reed. It was a paper she had written for a graduate seminar, a paper Gregory had once called a pointless academic exercise. On a whim, she updated the paper with new research and data she had access to through her university's online portal. She published it on a few academic forums and her own modest professional website, thinking nothing of it. That was 6 months ago. 6 months before she found herself in a courtroom, listening to that same man declare her worthless to the world, all while he prepared to put a gaudy ring on the finger of the woman who had helped dismantle her life. He thought he knew her story. He thought he had written the final chapter. He had no idea she had started a whole new book. Back in the courtroom, Judge Davies adjusted her robes, her brow sharp and focused. A change in circumstance, Ms. Chen. Please enlighten us. Gregory leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms. He whispered something to Brooke, who giggled, covering her mouth with the hand bearing the ostentatious ring. They looked like 2 high school bullies, confident in their social standing, ready to mock the nerdy girl. Ms. Chen walked calmly to her table and picked up a single crisp folder. Your Honor, Mr. Peterson, on behalf of his client, has painted a picture of Ms. Reed as a woman without prospects, entirely dependent on Mr. Nash's past generosity. He claims her pursuits are mere hobbies and that she has no earning potential. She paused, letting the words hang in the air. This is, and I choose my words carefully, a foundation of lies built on Mr. Nash's own colossal ego and his deliberate suppression of my client's career for the past 12 years. Mr. Peterson shot to his feet. Objection counsel is casting aspersions on my client's character. It is not an aspersion if it is the truth, Mr. Peterson, Judge Davies said, dryly waving him down. Proceed, Ms. Chen, but get to the point. My point, Your Honor, is that my client is not unemployed. She is not directionless. For the past 6 months, Ms. Reed has been operating her own highly specialized consultancy firm, Reed Provenance and Advisory. Gregory let out another short, derisive laugh. A little online business. I saw the website. It looks like a high school project. How much could she possibly be making? A few $100s a month authenticating garage sale paintings. On the contrary, Ms. Chen said, her voice dropping slightly, drawing everyone in. While her client list is small, it is exceptionally distinguished. Her work has recently garnered significant attention in very exclusive circles. It seems her pointless academic exercises, as Mr. Nash once called them, are quite valuable after all. Amelia remained still, her eyes on Ms. Chen. It was happening. The quiet work, the lonely nights spent in her small apartment, surrounded by books and digital archives, was about to be brought into the harsh light of this courtroom. A part of her was terrified, but a stronger part felt a surge of righteous power. Ms. Chen continued, due to this success and a recent very positive development in her personal life, Ms. Reed no longer requires or desires any financial entanglement with Mr. Nash. Therefore, we are withdrawing our claim for spousal support. We only ask for the 50-50 division of the marital home's sale price, as is standard, and for her to be allowed to collect the last of her personal research materials from the property. Gregory was now looking genuinely bewildered. This wasn't going according to his script. He had expected a fight, tears, a desperate plea for more money. That was the role Amelia was supposed to play. Her refusal to need him, her calm dismissal of his money, was more insulting than any demand could have been. It chipped away at the narrative he had built for himself, the one where he was the magnanimous victor bestowing charity upon the vanquished. So that's it, Mr. Peterson asked, looking at his notes confused. You're just dropping the alimony claim after all that fuss in mediation? Circumstances change, Mr. Peterson, Ms. Chen replied. Judge Davies looked from Ms. Chen to Amelia, a new respect dawning in her eyes. This is highly unusual, but if Ms. Reed is financially secure and wishes to withdraw the claim, the court will not stand in her way. Is there anything else? Gregory couldn't stand it. He had to regain control. This spectacle was for him, about him, and Amelia was ruining it with her quiet dignity. Your Honor, this is ridiculous, he interjected, standing up without waiting for his lawyer. She's trying to make a point. It's a pathetic attempt to save face. There's no way she's financially secure. Ask her. Ask her to prove it. Ask her what this positive development in her life is. He glanced at Brooke, then back at Amelia, his voice dripping with venom. Did some community college offer you a teaching gig? Or did you find another man to leech off of? Is that it? Mr. Peterson tried to pull his client back down, whispering, Gregory, don't. But the damage was done. The accusation hung in the air, ugly and raw. Judge Davies's eyes narrowed into slits. Mr. Nash, you will sit down and you will be silent, or I will hold you in contempt. That was a disgusting and uncalled for remark. But the question was out there, and Ms. Chen saw her opening. It was the perfect segue served up on a silver platter by Gregory's own arrogance. She gave a small, almost imperceptible nod to Amelia. Actually, Your Honor, Ms. Chen said, turning back to the judge. Since Mr. Nash is so curious about my client's personal life, perhaps it is relevant. The positive development I referred to is indeed a personal one. Ms. Reed recently became engaged. A wave of shock rippled through the room. Engaged Amelia Reed. The quiet, dowdy woman Gregory had thrown away. Gregory's face was a mask of disbelief, which quickly morphed into amusement. He pictured some sad, lonely professor or a struggling artist. He leaned over to Brooke and whispered, probably to his cat, loud enough for the first few rows to hear. Brooke let out a shrill giggle. She held up her own hand again, admiring her diamond, as if to say, no ring could possibly compete with this. An engagement, Judge Davies repeated, intrigued. Congratulations, Ms. Reed. Amelia gave a slight, grateful nod. Yes, and it is this engagement that solidifies her financial future, making any support from Mr. Nash entirely redundant, Ms. Chen stated. Oh, here we go, Gregory muttered, rolling his eyes. She found some other sap to pay her bills. Ms. Chen ignored him, her gaze fixed on the judge. Mr. Nash has made quite a show of his own fiancée's ring, a symbol of his success, he believes. Perhaps this would be an appropriate moment for Ms. Reed to show the court the symbol of her own new beginning. All eyes swiveled to Amelia's hands, which were still clasped demurely in her lap. They were bare, save for a simple, thin silver band on her right hand that she had worn for years. There was no engagement ring. Gregory's smirk returned wider and more vicious than ever. What's the matter, Amy? Is the ring too small to see from here? Is it made of tin foil? Amelia met his gaze. The calm was still there, but now it was edged with steel. Slowly, deliberately, she reached into the simple leather handbag at her feet. The courtroom was so quiet, you could hear the faint click of the bag's clasp opening. Her movements were unhurried, graceful. She was no longer the defendant in his play. She was the star of her own. She withdrew her hand, and the entire room, for a collective second, simply stopped breathing. It wasn't a ring, it was a revelation. Resting in the palm of Amelia's hand was not a piece of jewelry, but a piece of history. It wasn't designed to shout, it was designed to captivate. At its center was not a diamond, but a sapphire. It was a Padparadscha sapphire, a stone so rare it hovers between pink and orange, capturing the impossible color of a lotus blossom at sunset. The gem was easily 5 or 6 carats, cushion cut, with a fire that seemed to burn from within. It wasn't a modern, flashy cut. It was an older, deeper cut that spoke of legacy and timelessness. The stone was flanked by 2 antique-cut diamonds, pear-shaped and exquisitely clear, but they were merely attendants to the queenly sapphire. The setting itself was not bright, sterile platinum, but the warm, soft glow of rose gold, intricately worked with a filigree design that was clearly handcrafted, clearly vintage. It was a ring that belonged in a museum, a ring that whispered stories of Gilded Age heiresses and European royalty. Compared to this, Brooke's massive diamond suddenly looked common, loud, a bauble bought from a catalogue of modern luxury. Amelia's ring was an artifact. It was art. Amelia slowly, gracefully slipped the ring onto the 4th finger of her left hand. It fit perfectly. It looked like it was forged for her. She didn't flaunt it. She didn't wiggle her fingers or angle it to the light. She simply placed her hand on the table in front of her, the magnificent gem glowing with a quiet, confident power that filled the entire room. A collective gasp went through the gallery. Mr. Peterson's jaw went slack. Brooke Harrison's professionally applied tan seemed to pale. Her eyes fixed on Amelia's hand, her own suddenly looking garish and cheap. But the most significant reaction came from the bench. Judge Rosalind Davies, a woman who had seen mobsters Billionaires and celebrities come through her courtroom. A woman, known for her unshakable composure, leaned forward. Her eyes widened, and she let out a small, sharp, involuntary intake of breath. The sound was audible in the silent room. She wasn't just looking at the size or the value. She was a student of the law of history, and she recognized significance when she saw it. "My God," she breathed almost to herself. Gregory Nash stared his face, a comical tableau of confusion, disbelief, and dawning horror. The color drained from his face. He knew jewelry. He knew status symbols. And he knew, with a sickening certainty that was rising in his gut, that the ring on Amelia's finger was in a different universe from the one he had purchased for Brooke. It wasn't just more expensive. It was from a different world of wealth, a world of legacy and power he couldn't even touch. What is that?" he stammered, the words catching in his throat. Miss Chen smiled a thin, triumphant smile. "That Mr. Nash is the Delancey sapphire. It was last seen publicly at a Sotheby's auction in 1958 when it was purchased by the Finch family." Finch. The name dropped into the courtroom like a 10-ton weight. It was a name that didn't need an introduction. It wasn't just rich. It was a dynasty. Technology, shipping art, philanthropy. The Finches were notoriously private, their wealth so vast and old, it was almost mythical. They didn't appear in gossip columns. They funded entire university departments and owned private islands. "Ms. Reed's fiancé," Miss Chen announced, her voice ringing with finality, "is Mr. Alistair Finch." Silence. A profound, echoing silence. Alistair Finch, the reclusive head of the Finch empire, a man in his late 50s, a widower, who was more likely to be photographed with a newly discovered antiquity than with a woman on his arm. He was a legend, a figure of immense quiet power. He was, without exaggeration, one of the wealthiest men in the world. Gregory Nash swayed on his feet. The Bryony suit suddenly felt like a cheap rental. His entire sense of self, built on a foundation of moderate financial success and the bullying of those he deemed lesser, was crumbling into dust. He wasn't the victor in a divorce settlement. He was a gnat buzzing in the shadow of a giant. He looked at Amelia, the woman he had called complacent, passionless, and boring, the woman he had mocked for her little hobby. He tried to connect the dots, and his mind came up blank. How? When? Why? The judge? The judge had recovered her composure, but her eyes kept flicking back to the ring and then to Amelia with a look of utter reappraisal. She was no longer seeing a wronged wife. She was seeing a woman who had somehow impossibly ascended to the highest echelons of society. "Well," Judge Davies said, her voice laced with a new and profound respect, "that certainly clarifies the matter of financial support." She cleared her throat, looking down at the paperwork on her desk as if seeing it for the first time. "Given this information, the court accepts Ms. Reed's withdrawal of the spousal support claim. The settlement will proceed based on the standard 50-50 split of the marital assets accumulated during the marriage, primarily the sale of the house. Are there any other matters?" Mr. Peterson, looking dazed, just shook his head. Gregory sank into his chair, his face ashen. He glanced at Brooke. The triumphant glee was gone from her face, replaced by a raw, naked jealousy that was ugly to behold. She was staring at Amelia's ring, then at her own, and the calculation was plain to see. She had hitched her wagon to a regional real estate developer, while the discarded wife had somehow landed a king. Her diamond no longer felt like a trophy. It felt like a consolation prize. The war was over. Gregory had come to the courtroom armed with a cannon, ready to obliterate Amelia's dignity. He hadn't realized she was about to arrive with a weapon of such devastating power that it rendered his entire arsenal obsolete without firing a single shot. And the most terrifying part for him was that he had absolutely no idea how she had done it. The courtroom proceedings wrapped up in a blur of legal formalities. The gavel fell with a dull thud, officially dissolving the marriage of Reed and Nash. Gregory and Brooke practically fled the room, their retreat stripped of all its earlier bravado. They didn't speak a word, the space between them now filled with the toxic fallout of jealousy and crushed ego. Once the room had cleared, only Amelia and Ms. Chen remained packing their briefcases. Judge Davies was still on the bench, shuffling papers, but she paused and looked at Amelia. "Ms. Reed," she said, her tone no longer just professional, but tinged with genuine curiosity. "For what it's worth, congratulations on everything." "Thank you, Your Honor," Amelia replied, her voice soft but firm. It was the first time she had spoken in nearly an hour. Outside the courthouse, the Boston air felt fresh and clean. The weight of the last 12 years, a burden she hadn't even fully realized she was carrying, seemed to lift from her shoulders. "You were brilliant, Ms. Chen Tant," Amelia said, turning to her lawyer. "I just presented the facts." Ms. Chen smiled. "You did all the hard work." Gregory Nash's face was a picture I'll treasure for a very long time. A black town car, sleek and discreet, pulled up to the curb. The driver, a man with a quiet professional demeanor, got out and opened the rear door for her. This, too, was a world away from the flashy sports cars Gregory favored. It was understated, secure, and confident. As Amelia was about to get in, a voice choked with rage and disbelief called her name. "Amelia." She turned. It was Gregory. He had clearly sent Brooke away and had come back, his face a mess of confusion and fury. "How?" he demanded, walking right up to her, his voice low and intense. "Just tell me how. Did you meet him at some charity fundraiser? Did you hunt him down? Did you lie to him about who you were?" The accusations were pathetic, the desperate flailing of a man whose worldview had been shattered. He couldn't conceive of a reality where she had earned this. It had to be a trick, a seduction, a lie. Amelia looked at the man she had once loved. She felt no anger, no hatred. For the first time, she felt only a profound and genuine pity. He was so trapped in his world of transactional relationships and status symbols that he couldn't see the truth, even if it was standing right in front of him. "You really want to know, Gregory?" she asked, her voice calm. "Yes, I deserve to know." "No, you don't deserve anything," she corrected him gently. "But I'll tell you anyway. I didn't meet him at a party. I've never been to one of his galas. He contacted me." Gregory stared blankly. "Contacted you? Why, he's a collector." "Gregory, it's his private passion. He owns one of the world's most significant private collections of Renaissance art. And 6 months ago, he was in a dispute with a major auction house over the attribution of a painting. He was planning to acquire a piece from the workshop of Jan van Eyck." She let that sink in. Gregory's face remained blank. The name meant nothing to him. "The auction house's experts had one opinion," Amelia continued. Alistair had his own theory. While his team was researching, one of his young art historians found a paper on an obscure academic forum. A paper that proposed a new methodology for identifying underdrawings using multispectral imaging, proving that certain brushstrokes and pigments previously attributed to the master were in fact from his top apprentice. Recognition, dim at first, then horrifically bright, dawned in Gregory's eyes. "The paper," Amelia said, "was one I wrote in graduate school. The one you told me was a pointless academic exercise that I should throw away. I'd updated it and posted it online. Alistair read it. He said it was the most brilliant and original piece of art scholarship he'd read in 20 years. He flew his entire team to his estate in Geneva for a meeting, and he flew me there with them." Gregory's mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. "My little hobby," Gregory ended up saving Alistair Finch over $40 million. The painting was indeed the work of the apprentice. He was impressed. He hired me as a consultant to his family's private foundation to oversee the authentication of their entire collection. He paid me a retainer that was more than the settlement you just offered me." She looked down at the magnificent ring on her finger. We spent the next few months working together, in archives, in museum vaults, in his library. We talked for hours about art, about history, about books. He didn't care what I wore or if I knew the right people. He fell in love with my mind. The mind you tried so hard to convince me was worthless. She paused, delivering the final quiet blow. This ring, he didn't buy it. It belonged to his grandmother. He said he was waiting for a woman who understood that its greatest value wasn't in the carats, but in its story, in its provenance. Provenance. Her life's passion. The very word defined her. Gregory looked utterly defeated. It was worse than he could have ever imagined. She hadn't won the lottery. She hadn't seduced a rich man. Her success, her new life, her incredible love story. It was all born from the very essence of her that he had mocked, belittled, and tried to extinguish. He hadn't just lost her, he had fundamentally misunderstood her value. He had thrown away a priceless masterpiece because he was incapable of seeing beyond its simple frame. Without another word, Amelia turned and slipped into the waiting car. As it pulled away from the curb, she didn't look back. She was looking forward towards a future that was brighter than any diamond, a future she had built, not by marrying a billionaire, but by finally truly becoming herself. The town car moved silently through the city traffic, a quiet cocoon, insulating Amelia from the noise of the world she was leaving behind. She felt a deep, shuddering exhale release from her lungs, a breath she seemed to have been holding for more than a decade. The Delancey sapphire on her finger was cool against her skin, a solid, tangible proof of her new reality. The car didn't take her to a new mansion or a high-rise penthouse. It took her to the Boston Public Library. She walked through the grand, echoing halls of the McKim building, the scent of old paper and polished wood a familiar comfort. She found him, not in a private room, but sitting at a long public table in the Bates Hall reading room, a book open before him, looking completely at ease among the students and scholars. Alistair Finch looked up as she approached, and a warm, genuine smile transformed his face. He wasn't classically handsome in the way Gregory was. His face was lined with thought and laughter. His hair was more salt than pepper. But his eyes were sharp, intelligent, and full of a kindness that she now knew was his defining feature. He stood and pulled her into a gentle hug, his hand resting on the small of her back. "It's done," she said quietly, her voice muffled against the soft cashmere of his sweater. "I never had any doubt," he murmured into her hair. "Are you all right?" "I'm better than all right," she said, pulling back to look at him. "I feel free." He took her hand, his thumb, stroking over the intricate setting of the ring. "I was just reading about the Florentine guilds. It made me think of you." There was no talk of the court case, no gloating over Gregory's defeat, no mention of the monetary value of their combined fortunes. Their connection existed on a different plane, one woven from shared intellectual curiosity and deep mutual respect. He hadn't rescued her. He had recognized her. He saw the masterpiece that Gregory had left covered in a dusty sheet in the attic. "Did you know," he said, his eyes twinkling, "that some art historians believe the secret to Verrocchio's workshop success was an unassuming woman named Caterina, his primary pigment grinder, who had an unparalleled eye for color. She's barely a footnote in history, but he was lost without her." Amelia smiled, a true, radiant smile that reached her eyes. "I think I'd like to read about her." He closed his book and tucked her arm in his. "I have a first edition in my library. Let's go home." Home. The word resonated with a meaning it had never had before. It wasn't a house. It was a person. Meanwhile, miles away, in a sterile white high-rise apartment that suddenly felt small and temporary, Gregory Nash poured himself a third glass of expensive scotch. Brooke was on the phone in the other room, her voice a high-pitched, frantic whisper. He could guess the conversation. She was talking to her mother or her best friend, complaining, comparing, calculating. The foundation of their relationship, his superior status, had been vaporized. Now, all that was left was a man she saw as second best and a woman who saw him as a stepping stone that had just crumbled beneath her. He swirled the amber liquid in his glass, the reflection of the city lights warping and twisting. He thought of Amelia in the library, all those years ago, her face illuminated by a desk lamp, her expression one of intense concentration and joy. He had found that passion boring. He had tried to snuff it out and replace it with a passion for his life, his success. He had succeeded in driving her away, but he had failed to destroy the thing he couldn't understand. And in the end, that very thing had become the source of a power and a happiness so immense he couldn't even comprehend it. He had spent years trying to prove he was the prize, only to realize, in one brutal, humiliating afternoon, that he had been the fool who didn't recognize true value. He had owned a masterpiece, and in his ignorance had thrown it in the trash, never once realizing its worth until he saw it beautifully framed, hanging on a palace wall. And he knew with a certainty that burned more than any scotch that he would spend the rest of his life haunted by the ghost of that priceless, unseen art. 6 months passed, and the seasons turned. The bitter chill of the Boston courthouse faded into a memory, replaced by the gentle, persistent green of an English spring. Amelia found herself in a world she had previously only accessed through books. Alistair's primary residence was not a monument to modern wealth, but a sprawling Jacobean manor in the Cotswolds, a place of warm stone, rambling roses, and centuries of quiet history. Its soul was the library, a 2-story cathedral of wood and leather, holding thousands of volumes and smelling perpetually of beeswax and old paper. This was their sanctuary, their office, their home. They were working at a massive oak table surrounded by illuminated manuscripts laid carefully on velvet cloths. Alistair had decided to fund and curate a public exhibition, The Scribe's Hand, which would showcase the evolution of medieval calligraphy, and he had insisted that Amelia be credited not as a consultant, but as the exhibition's co-curator. "The shadowing on the Lombardic capitals here," Alistair said, pointing with a gloved finger at a 14th century book of hours. "It's consistent with the work we saw in the Gascogne Psalter, isn't it? The pressure is identical." Amelia leaned closer, her own eyes now trained and confident, scanning the delicate gold leaf. "It is," she confirmed. "But look at the gesso preparation underneath. It's thicker, more rushed. The Gascogne artist was patient. This one was working to a deadline." Alistair beamed a look of pure, unadulterated delight. It was a look she had come to cherish. It was the thrill of shared discovery. "I never would have seen that. You see the story, Amelia? I just see the object." "You taught me to look," she countered softly, placing her hand over his. This was their life now, a quiet, profound partnership built on mutual intellectual fascination and a deep, steady love. He had given her access to a world of wonders, but more importantly, he had given her the confidence and the platform to let her own brilliance shine. She was no longer a supporting character in someone else's story. His assistant, a polite young man named David, entered the library soundlessly and placed a tablet on the corner of the table. "Mr. Finch, this just came in for Ms. Reed. It's from the Vice-Chancellor's office at Oxford." Amelia's brow furrowed in confusion. She picked up the tablet. It was a formal letter, an invitation. The Ashmolean Museum, in conjunction with the university's history faculty, was hosting its annual symposium on Renaissance studies. They were formally inviting Dr. Amelia Reed to be this year's keynote speaker. They cited her groundbreaking and paradigm-shifting work on Northern Renaissance attribution. Her breath caught in her throat. Keynote speaker at Oxford. It was the kind of honor reserved for the titans of her field, the culmination of a lifelong career. Alistair read the letter over her shoulder, his arm wrapping around her. He didn't say, "I'm so proud of you." He said, "They're lucky to have you. You're going to be brilliant." Tears welled in her eyes, not of sadness or humiliation, but of overwhelming, profound gratitude. She was finally fully seen. While Amelia's world was expanding, Gregory Nash's was rapidly shrinking. The initial shock of the courtroom defeat had curdled into a prolonged, agonizing downfall. The relationship with Brooke had imploded just days after the hearing in a spectacle of screeching tires and hurled insults. "You let her humiliate you," Brooke had screamed, standing in the middle of their minimalist living room, which now felt as cold and empty as their future. She had thrown the 3-carat diamond ring at him. It had skittered across the marble floor with a pathetic tinny sound. "You were supposed to be the winner. Instead, you looked like a pathetic little man next to her. Her king. What am I supposed to tell people, that my fiancé got dumped for Alistair Finch?" Her rage wasn't about his pain or his loss. It was about her own reflection in the cracked mirror of his status. He saw with sickening clarity that she had never loved him. She had loved the idea of him, an idea he himself had so carefully fabricated. When that fabrication was shattered by the Delancey sapphire, so was her affection. She left, taking her outrage and her ambitions to find a bigger, better platform. The social fallout was swift, but the professional consequences were a slow, bleeding wound. Gregory's business was built on perception. He sold luxury exclusivity and the illusion of being part of an elite club. That illusion was now a laughingstock. Whispers followed him at business lunches. The story, too delicious to remain private, had leaked. He was the man who didn't recognize his wife was brilliant, the fool who flaunted a trinket while she held a national treasure. The final nail in the coffin of his ambition was hammered in by a man named Arthur Sterling, a silver-haired titan of old money finance, whose backing Gregory desperately needed for his flagship project, the Apex Towers. They met in Sterling's club, a place so steeped in tradition and quiet power that Gregory's Brioni suit felt like a costume. After the perfunctory project discussion, Sterling leaned back, swirling the brandy in his snifter. "Nash," he said, his voice smooth as silk, "reputation is a fragile thing in our world. It's currency, and frankly, the optics on your recent domestic affairs are troubling." Gregory's stomach tightened. "That was a private matter, Arthur." "There are no private matters when a man of Alistair Finch's stature is involved," Sterling corrected him coolly. "I sit on the board of the Metropolitan Museum with him. A fine man. He speaks very highly of his fiancée, Dr. Reed. Says she has the sharpest mind for provenance he's ever encountered. Remarkable woman." Sterling took a sip of brandy, his eyes cold and appraising over the rim of the glass. "A man who makes such a colossal misjudgment of character in his personal life. It makes one question his judgment in professional matters. A project of this scale requires foresight, discretion, and an impeccable understanding of value. I'm afraid my confidence has been shaken." And just like that, the deal was dead. Sterling wasn't just pulling his funding, he was passing a verdict. Gregory Nash was no longer in the club. That evening, Gregory sat alone in his vast empty office, the city lights twinkling mockingly outside his window. The bottle of Macallan 25 on his desk was half empty. He had been scrolling aimlessly through the financial news when a headline on a sidebar caught his eye. "Oxford taps luminary art historian Dr. Amelia Reed for symposium keynote." He clicked on it. There was a photo of Amelia taken recently. She was standing in a magnificent sunlit library, smiling. It was not the tight, practiced smile he remembered. This one was genuine, radiant, and utterly content. She looked younger, more vibrant, and more intelligent than he had ever allowed himself to see her. The article sang her praises, detailing her revolutionary research and mentioning her close collaboration and upcoming marriage to philanthropist Alistair Finch. He read the words over and over. Luminary, revolutionary, brilliant. These were words people were using to describe the woman he had called complacent and boring. The woman whose intellect he had actively tried to smother beneath a mountain of household chores and social obligations. A wave of nausea, thick and bitter, rose in his throat. It wasn't just about the money he'd lost or the fiancée who'd left. It was the crushing, absolute finality of his own stupidity. He had stood in a field of diamonds and complained he was bored of rocks, all while chasing a piece of glittering quartz. His entire identity was built on his supposed ability to spot value in property, in markets, in people. And he had failed the most important evaluation of his life. He hadn't just lost a wife, he had been the architect of his own ruin, brick by arrogant brick. He had tried to build a cage for her, only to discover that he was the one who was truly trapped, imprisoned by his own shallow values, his pathetic ego, and his monumental, irreversible ignorance. He stared at the picture of Amelia's smiling face, the woman who had built a kingdom from the very rubble he had made of her life. He switched off the monitor, but her image was burned into his mind, leaving him alone in the suffocating darkness. That, my friends, is the story of Amelia Reed. It's a story that reminds us that true value is never about the price tag of the ring on your finger, but about the passion in your soul. Gregory tried to win a war of wealth and status, a battle fought with diamonds and designer suits, but he lost spectacularly because Amelia was fighting a different war altogether, a war for her own identity. She proved that the most powerful asset you can ever possess is the one no one can take away. Your own intellect, your own spirit, and the courage to pursue what you love. Her victory wasn't just getting the billionaire, it was realizing she was the treasure all along. In the heart of New York City, where fortunes are forged and reputations are shattered, in a single evening, the annual Starlight Gala was the apex of the social season. Tonight, all eyes were on tech titan Diego Stafford and his new fiancée, a woman half his age with diamonds that glittered like her ambition. He paraded her like a trophy, a public declaration that his past, his quiet, unassuming ex-wife, Melanie, was nothing but a forgotten footnote. But in a world of curated perfection, a single moment can unravel everything. A gasp, a sudden silence, a turn of heads toward the grand entrance. Because the footnote just walked in, and she was about to rewrite the entire story. The Grand Astoria ballroom was a testament to opulent excess. Light from 3 colossal crystal chandeliers, each the size of a small car, fractured into a million shimmering pieces, dancing across the gilded cornices and the sea of couture-clad guests below. The air, thick with the scent of lilies and expensive perfume, vibrated with the carefully modulated hum of the city's elite. This was the Starlight Gala for Children's Health, an event where compassion was a currency and social standing was the ultimate prize. And tonight, Diego Stafford was winning. He stood near the sweeping marble staircase, one hand possessively on the small of his fiancée's back, the other holding a flute of Dom Perignon. At 45, Diego was a force of nature. His company, Stafford Innovations, had revolutionized data security, making him a billionaire before his 40th birthday. He had a predator's smile, sharp and knowing, and eyes the color of cold steel that missed nothing. He had built his empire on ruthless acquisitions and an unerring instinct for weakness. His fiancée, Tiffany Dubois, was the perfect accessory to his success. She was 24, a former brand strategist, whose primary brand seemed to be herself. Her gown was a fiery red, Alexander McQueen, audacious and unforgiving, clinging to a figure honed by personal trainers and a disciplined diet of kale and ambition. A necklace of staggering canary diamonds, a recent gift from Diego, blazed at her throat. She laughed a sound that was a little too loud, a little too practiced, designed to draw every eye in her vicinity. "Darling," she purred, tilting her head back so the light caught the facets of her earrings. "Robert Carlyle from Forbes is staring again. He must be desperate for a quote about the merger." Diego squeezed her waist gently. "Let him be desperate. Tonight is about us. And of course, he added, with a magnanimous wave, the children. His gaze swept the room with an air of supreme ownership. He saw the subtle nods of deference, the envious glances, the way people angled themselves to catch his eye. This was his world, a kingdom he had built from the ground up, and every piece of it was a reflection of his power, especially the woman beside him. Tiffany was everything his ex-wife Melanie had not been. She was vibrant, sexually confident, and utterly enamored with the public stage. Melanie. The name surfaced in his mind like a phantom, unwelcome and irritating. He hadn't thought of her in months, not really. Their divorce had been finalized a year ago, a clean surgical cut. He had been generous, of course. His lawyers had ensured the world knew just how generous he was. He'd given her the quiet suburban house they had once shared, and a settlement that to anyone else would seem immense. To him, it was a rounding error, the cost of shedding dead weight. He remembered their last meeting in the lawyer's office. Melanie had been so beige. Her sensible grey suit, her hair pulled back in a simple knot, her face pale and devoid of makeup. She had looked drained, a ghost haunting the edges of his vibrant new life. She hadn't fought him. She hadn't screamed or cried or thrown things. She had just sat there, her hands clasped in her lap, her silence more unnerving than any tirade. "Is this what you want, Diego?" she had asked, her voice barely a whisper. "It's what's necessary, Melanie." He'd replied, his tone clipped and final. "We've grown apart. I'm moving forward. You're not." The unspoken words hung in the air. "You're not young enough, not exciting enough, not beautiful enough. You are the starter wife, the cocoon I had to shed to become the butterfly." He had convinced himself it was true. She had been the quiet librarian's daughter. He'd met in college, the steady grounding force, while he was a chaotic storm of ambition. She'd managed their home, supported his early ventures with her small inheritance, and provided a calm refuge from his battles in the boardroom. But refuges become prisons when you want to fly. "I still can't believe she had the nerve to try and keep the Rothkos," Tiffany said suddenly, pulling him from his reverie. She was scrolling through her phone, a smirk playing on her perfectly glossed lips. "I saw the auction results from Sotheby's. She sold them. Probably needed the money to fix the roof on that sad little house." Diego grunted. The two Mark Rothko paintings had been a point of contention. Melanie had a preternatural eye for art, a skill he'd once found charming and had even profited from. She'd bought the paintings years ago, long before their value had skyrocketed. She'd claimed they were a joint investment, bought with money from her family. His lawyers had argued otherwise. In the end, as part of the settlement, she had been forced to sell one, and he had kept the other, the larger, more significant piece, which now hung in the lobby of Stafford Tower. "She has no appreciation for what they represent," Diego said dismissively. "To her, they were just colours on a canvas. To me, they represent vision, the foresight to acquire a masterpiece." He conveniently forgot that it was Melanie who had stood for hours in a dusty gallery, convincing a skeptical dealer that she, a young woman in a simple coat, understood the soul of the artist. The orchestra began to play a soft waltz. A few couples drifted onto the dance floor. The atmosphere was one of serene, self-congratulatory elegance. Diego felt a surge of triumph. Everything was perfect. He had the business world by the throat, the most talked-about woman in New York on his arm, and the ghost of his past was exactly where she belonged in the past. Forgotten. Irrelevant. It was precisely at that moment, when his satisfaction was at its absolute peak, that the low hum of the ballroom began to change. It started not as a sound, but as a feeling, a subtle shift in the room's energy. A few conversations near the grand entrance faltered. Heads turned not with casual interest, but with a sharp, unified focus. The movement rippled inward, a wave of silent inquiry spreading through the crowd. Tiffany noticed it first. "What is it? Did a celebrity arrive?" she asked, craning her neck. Diego followed her gaze. A pathway was parting in the crowd, a silent corridor being carved through the sea of tuxedos and ball gowns. The guests weren't just looking, they were staring. Jaws were slack. Champagne flutes were held, forgotten halfway to lips. Even Robert Carlyle of Forbes had lowered his phone, his reporter's instincts replaced by simple, unadulterated shock. And then he saw her. For a disorienting second, his brain refused to process the image. It was like seeing a character from a black and white film suddenly appear in vibrant, blinding technicolor. The woman standing at the top of the stairs was tall, poised her posture, radiating a calm authority that seemed to command the very air around her. Her hair, which he remembered as a simple brown, was now a rich, deep chestnut, styled in elegant waves that cascaded over one shoulder. Her face was luminous, her features sculpted by a subtle, masterful hand, highlighting the high cheekbones and intelligent eyes he'd once claimed to love. But it was the gown that was causing the collective paralysis. It wasn't just a dress. It was a work of art, a cascade of midnight blue silk organza and hand-embroidered platinum thread that seemed to have captured a piece of the cosmos. Thousands of tiny, meticulously placed diamonds and sapphires glittered within its folds, not with the gaudy fire of Tiffany's necklace, but with the deep, mysterious twinkle of a distant nebula. The gown flowed from a structured, corseted bodice down to a sweeping train that pooled on the marble floor like liquid moonlight. It was a garment that spoke not of expense, but of legacy. It was breathtaking. It was magnificent. It was Diego's mind calculated with the speed of a stock market algorithm, astronomically expensive. And the woman wearing it, the woman who was now descending the staircase with the unhurried grace of a queen, was his ex-wife, Melanie Price. The silence that had fallen over the Grand Astoria ballroom was profound. It was a heavy-weighted quiet, thick with shock and disbelief. The orchestra, sensing the seismic shift in the room's atmosphere, trailed off mid-note, the last violin string seeming to hang in the air like a question mark. All the power, all the attention, all the ambient energy that had been orbiting Diego and Tiffany just moments before had now been captured by a new, irresistible gravitational force at the top of the stairs. Melanie descended. She didn't hurry. Each step was deliberate, poised her hand gliding lightly along the polished marble balustrade. Her expression was serene, a subtle, almost imperceptible smile playing on her lips. It wasn't a smile of triumph or malice. It was one of quiet confidence of a woman perfectly at ease in her own skin, in her own power. She wasn't looking at Diego. Her gaze was directed forward, scanning the room with a calm, appraising look, as if she were merely a guest arriving at a party where she knew she belonged. The gown was the epicenter of the spectacle. Whispers finally began to break the silence, starting in the back and rippling forward like a gathering storm. "My God, is that a Devereaux?" a woman with a Chanel tweed jacket hissed to her companion. "I thought he stopped designing." "Julian Devereaux." "No, it can't be. He hasn't done a private commission in 20 years. Look at the embroidery, the starlight pattern. That's his signature. That's not a dress, that's a museum piece." Julian Devereaux was a name whispered, with the reverence usually reserved for deities or ghosts. The legendary couturier had been the darling of royalty and old money dynasties before abruptly retiring at the peak of his fame, disgusted by the commercialism of modern fashion. He lived in monastic seclusion in a Scottish castle, rumoured to occasionally create a piece for his own artistic satisfaction, pieces that were never sold, only gifted or vaulted away. To wear a new Devereaux was not a matter of money, it was a matter of being deemed worthy by the master himself. And this gown was unmistakably new, a celestial masterpiece that made every other designer piece in the room look like a cheap imitation. Someone near the press line, a young fashion blogger with a rapidly growing following, was already typing furiously into her phone. Sources say The gown features over 10 zero assembrates hand-set diamonds and sapphires from a private collection. Early estimate at least $2 million, maybe more. The figure shot through the room via text messages and hushed exchanges, adding another layer of awe and confusion to the scene. $2 million, worn by Melanie Price, the forgotten ex-wife. Diego felt a cold knot tighten in his stomach. It was a feeling he despised, a feeling he hadn't experienced in years, the loss of control. He watched her, and it was like looking at a stranger. The Melanie he had discarded was a creature of earth tones and comfortable fabrics. She preferred books to parties' quiet nights to glittering galas. She would have considered a dress like this to be the height of frivolous absurdity. This woman, this vision descending the stairs, was someone else entirely. She had been remade, reforged in some unknown fire. Beside him, Tiffany was practically vibrating with fury. Her perfectly made-up face was a mask of incandescent rage, her knuckles white as she gripped her clutch. "What is she doing here?" she spat, her voice a venomous whisper. "And what in God's name is she wearing? Did she blow her entire settlement on a single dress? How pathetic." But the words rang hollow even to Diego. This wasn't pathetic. It was a declaration of war. A silent, elegant, devastatingly effective coup. Melanie hadn't screamed or thrown a tantrum. She had simply arrived, and in doing so, had made Tiffany's ostentatious diamonds and fiery red dress look cheap and desperate. She had stolen the spotlight without saying a single word. As Melanie reached the bottom of the staircase, a collective breath was released. She paused, and for the first time, her eyes swept over to where Diego and Tiffany stood. There was no flicker of pain, no hint of longing. There was only a cool, detached recognition, the kind one might give to a piece of furniture that had been rearranged. Her gaze lingered on him for a barest second before moving to Tiffany, taking in the McQueen dress and the canary diamonds with an almost clinical lack of interest. Then she gave a small, polite nod, a gesture of distant civility, and turned away. The spell was broken. The room erupted into a cacophony of excited chatter. People were no longer looking at Diego. They were looking at Melanie, trying to catch her eye, trying to understand the impossible transformation. The city's most influential figures, men and women Diego had spent years cultivating, were now gravitating toward his ex-wife. He watched in disbelief as Michael Beaumont, the elderly patriarch of a real estate dynasty, a man famously impervious to social climbing, moved to greet her. He bowed his head slightly, a gesture of old-world respect. "Mrs. Price," Beaumont said, his voice carrying in the relative quiet around them. "An unexpected pleasure. You look magnificent." "Mr. Beaumont," Melanie replied, her voice the same one Diego remembered, yet imbued with a new timbre of confidence. "Thank you. It's for a wonderful cause." She was a natural. She moved through this crowd with an easy grace, fielding compliments with humility and engaging in conversation with an intelligence that was drawing people in. She spoke to a curator from the MoMA about the nuances of post-war expressionism. She discussed philanthropic strategy with the chairwoman of the gala, demonstrating an encyclopedic knowledge of the charity's work. Diego felt a flush of heat crawl up his neck. This was the Melanie he had deliberately forgotten, the brilliant, perceptive woman who could hold her own in any intellectual circle. He had buried that memory under a narrative of her being plain and uninteresting because it suited him. He had wanted a beautiful ornament, not an intellectual equal. Now her brilliance, which he had once found stifling, was on full display, and the world was captivated. "Do something," Tiffany hissed, digging her nails into his arm. "She's making a fool of us. Go over there. Put her in her place." Diego knew it was a terrible idea. Confronting her now, while she was the center of this magnetic pull, would make him look petty and weak. But seeing the smirks on the faces of his rivals, the speculative looks from journalists, the sheer, unadulterated awe directed at the woman, he had cast off it was intolerable. His ego, the engine of his entire existence, demanded he reassert his dominance. He straightened his bow tie, plastered his predator's smile back on his face, and began to move toward her, Tiffany trailing in his wake like a furious shadow. He would remind her and everyone else who she was. She was his ex-wife, a relic, and he was Diego Stafford, the king of this world. He just had to remind his subjects. The path to Melanie was like wading through molasses. The very air around her seemed thicker charged with the energy of the crowd's fascination. As Diego approached, conversations lulled, and eyes shifted, sensing the impending collision. This was the drama they had been craving, the real reason many of them attended these events, to witness the rise and fall of fortunes, both social and financial. Melanie was speaking with Alistair Finch, a notoriously sharp and discerning British investor known for his Midas touch in the tech sector. Finch was in his late 60s, with a mane of silver hair and eyes that held a lifetime of shrewd calculations. He was the white whale of venture capital, and Diego had been trying to secure a meeting with him for 6 months, hoping to get Finch to invest in his new AI-driven satellite project. His assistant had been repeatedly rebuffed. Yet here was Melanie chatting with him, as if they were old friends. The ethical framework is the most crucial component, Melanie was saying, her tone earnest and compelling. Predictive analytics without a strong moral compass is just a high-tech weapon. The potential for misuse is staggering. Finch nodded slowly, his gaze fixed on her. A refreshing perspective, Mrs. Price. Most founders I meet talk about disruption and market share. Few mention morality. Before Melanie could respond, Diego inserted himself into the conversation, his smile wide and artificial. Alistair, I didn't realize you knew my ex-wife. He placed a deliberate, condescending emphasis on the word ex. Alistair Finch turned his cool gaze on Diego. I didn't. I'm having the pleasure of making her acquaintance now. We were just discussing the ethics of artificial intelligence. Ah, ethics, Diego said, with a dismissive chuckle, clapping Finch on the shoulder. Melanie was always more of a philosopher than a businesswoman, an admirable, if not particularly profitable trait. He looked at Melanie, his eyes glinting with malice. That's a rather spectacular dress, Melanie. You must have broken the bank. I hope you're managing your finances wisely. It was a low blow, a public insinuation that she was a foolish spendthrift living off his scraps. The small circle of onlookers held their breath. Melanie didn't flinch. She simply met his gaze, her expression unreadable. Thank you, Diego, she said, her voice even and calm. It's a Devereaux, a gift from the artist. And as for my finances, she added, a ghost of a smile touching her lips, you taught me the importance of shrewd investments. I've been applying the lesson. The comeback was perfect. It was polite, it deflected his jab, and it contained a subtle barb of its own, hinting at a success he knew nothing about. Finch's eyebrow arched in appreciation. Tiffany, however, lacked any sense of subtlety. Seeing Diego's attack fail, she stepped forward, her voice dripping with faux concern. Melanie, it's so good to see you out and about. We were so worried. After the divorce, you just disappeared. It's wonderful that you're feeling up to all this. She gestured vaguely at the opulent room. The implication clear, you don't belong here. She then zeroed in on the dress. $2 million, they're saying. Honestly, I think it's a bit much, don't you? For a charity event, it almost feels like you're trying to make the cause about yourself. Diego and I believe in quiet, substantive giving. This was a direct attack on Melanie's character, painting her as a selfish show-off. Diego watched, a cruel sense of satisfaction blooming in his chest. This, he thought, was how you handle her. Melanie turned her full attention to Tiffany. The shift was subtle, but the temperature around them seemed to drop by several degrees. She looked Tiffany up and down, her gaze lingering for a moment on the garish canary diamond necklace. It's interesting you mentioned substantive giving, Tiffany. Melanie said, her voice still quiet, but now laced with an edge of pure steel. This gala supports research into pediatric neurological disorders. It's a cause that's deeply personal to me. My younger sister Clara passed away from an undiagnosed glioma when she was 9. The revelation landed with the force of a physical blow. The manufactured drama of the evening suddenly felt cheap and tawdry in the face of such a genuine, painful truth. Tiffany's smug expression faltered, replaced by a flicker of panic. She had tried to score a social point and had stumbled into a minefield of real grief. Melanie wasn't finished. As for the dress, she continued, her voice softening slightly. Julian Devereaux is an old family friend of my mother's. When he heard I would be attending tonight in Clara's memory, he insisted on creating something special. He called it Clara's Constellation. His gift, he said, was to ensure that no one would forget why we are truly here. She paused, letting the weight of her words settle. So, no, I don't think it's a bit much. I think it's a tribute. She had not only defended herself, but had elevated the gown from a symbol of wealth to a memorial of love and loss. She had seized the moral high ground with such effortless grace that Tiffany was left speechless, her face flushed with humiliation. She had been exposed not just as catty, but as profoundly insensitive. Alistair Finch, who had been observing the entire exchange with the focus of a chess master, spoke into the silence. A beautiful tribute, Mrs. Price, truly. He then turned to Diego, his expression now decidedly frosty. Stafford, I believe my associate informed your office that my Q2 investment portfolio is fully committed. I won't have time for a meeting. Diego's smile froze on his face. It was a polite, public, and utterly brutal dismissal. Finch had just slammed the door on a potential $100 million investment in front of half of New York's financial elite. He hadn't just said no, he had made a point of saying it here now in the immediate aftermath of Diego and Tiffany's callousness. Diego felt the floor drop out from beneath him. He had come over to reassert his dominance and had instead been handed a devastating public defeat. He looked at Melanie, who was now graciously accepting a glass of water from a passing waiter, her composure absolute. There was a dangerous depth in her eyes he'd never seen before, or perhaps had simply refused to acknowledge. He had believed he'd shed his quiet, unassuming wife. But the woman standing before him was not a ghost. She was a queen, and she had just with devastating precision captured his king. The game, he was beginning to realize, had only just begun. Reeling from Finch's public rebuke, Diego retreated to the periphery of the ballroom, dragging a seething Tiffany with him. He needed a drink, something stronger than champagne, and a moment to recalibrate. The carefully constructed narrative of his evening of his life was fracturing before his eyes. "This is your fault," Tiffany hissed, her voice low and shaky with rage. "You were supposed to handle her. You let her walk all over you, all over us." "Be quiet," Diego snapped, his tone dangerously soft. He motioned to a waiter for a whiskey neat. "You're the one who brought up the dress. You walked right into her little sob story." "Sob story? She probably made that up." "Her sister?" Tiffany trailed off, realizing how monstrous she sounded. The problem was, she knew it was true. In the early days of their affair, Diego had once mentioned, in a moment of rare introspection, the shadow that the death of Melanie's sister had cast over her family. He had framed it as a source of her melancholy and risk aversion. Now Melanie had weaponized that same vulnerability, turning it into a shield of unimpeachable moral strength. Diego's mind was racing, trying to piece together the puzzle. The dress from a reclusive genius, the impossible poise, the instant rapport with a man like Alistair Finch. This wasn't a woman spending her alimony on a revenge dress. This was a calculated, strategic maneuver, and he had no idea what its objective was. The line she'd said to him echoed in his head. "You taught me the importance of shrewd investments. I've been applying the lesson." What investments? He had made sure the settlement, while large, wouldn't allow her to play in his league. He'd seen to it that her assets were mostly tied up in trusts and low-yield bonds managed by a firm loyal to him. He had designed it to be a comfortable cage, not a launch pad. Had she found a loophole? Meanwhile, across the room, Melanie was not basking in her social victory. She was working. After her conversation with Finch, she had been approached by several other key figures, including the technology editor for the New York Times and a prominent bioethicist from Columbia University. Her conversation was no longer about art or memories. It was about the future. Alistair Finch, having extricated himself from another conversation, made his way back to her side. "Mrs. Price," he began, his tone now one of pure business. "Your perspective on the ethical implementation of AI is not merely refreshing, it's vital. You speak with the authority of someone who is not just an observer. Forgive my directness, but what is it you do?" Melanie met his directness with her own. "Mr. Finch, after my divorce, I had two things in abundance: capital from the sale of some assets and time to think. I spent my life surrounded by beautiful things, mostly art, and I watched the art world become increasingly plagued by forgeries, uncertain provenance, and a lack of transparency that benefits criminals and cheats honest collectors." She paused, taking a sip of water. "My background is in art history, but my passion became technology, specifically how to apply it to solve this problem. Diego, my ex-husband, always saw my interest in art as a quaint hobby. He never saw its potential as a data set." Finch was listening intently, his mind clearly working. A data set. The largest, most complex, and most valuable data set in human history, Melanie confirmed. Every brushstroke, every canvas weave, every pigment composition is a unique signature. For the past year, I have been quietly building a company. We've assembled a team of the world's top art historians, materials, scientists, and most importantly, machine learning engineers. We've developed a proprietary AI that can analyze a piece of art at a microscopic level and determine its authenticity with a 99.98% accuracy rate, cross-referencing it against a blockchain-secured ledger of provenance we are building. She finally named it. We call it Veritas Art. The name hung in the air between them. Veritas, Latin for truth. It was a brilliant, elegant name for a company designed to bring certainty to a world of smoke and mirrors. Finch's eyes, which had been shrewd, now lit up with the unmistakable spark of discovery. This was what he lived for. Not just another social media app or a marginal improvement in data storage, but a true paradigm shift. A company that could disrupt and dominate a multi-billion-dollar global market. "You've kept this quiet," Finch stated, a hint of awe in his voice. "No press, no funding rounds. We've been operating in stealth mode, funded entirely by my own capital," Melanie explained. "I didn't want the hype and speculation that comes with venture funding until the technology was perfect. We're finalizing our beta phase now. We've already uncovered 3 masterpieces in private collections that were in fact sophisticated forgeries, saving our initial clients over $100 million. This was the masterstroke. She wasn't just a founder with an idea. She was a founder with a proven, functioning, and highly profitable product. She had used her own money, taken her own risks, and built her empire in silence, right under Diego's nose. The Rothko she had been forced to sell, he suddenly understood. She hadn't sold it for living expenses. She had sold it for seed money. She had liquidated one masterpiece to build a machine that could verify all of them. From his vantage point, Diego could see the intensity of the conversation between Melanie and Finch. He saw Finch nod a slow, deliberate gesture of profound agreement. He saw him hand Melanie his private business card, not the one his assistant gave out, but his personal one. It was the venture capital equivalent of a knighting. "I have a feeling, Miss Price," Finch said, his voice low but clear, "that Veritas Art is going to change the world. My fund, Finch Global, doesn't just invest in companies. We invest in visionaries. I would be honored to be a part of your journey. My team will call yours on Monday. We will make you an offer that reflects the magnitude of what you've built. Diego felt a wave of nausea. He had been trying to get Finch's money for a speculative satellite project. Melanie had just secured it for a fully realized world-changing company he never even knew existed. She hadn't just stolen his spotlight, she had stolen his future. He looked at his ex-wife, truly seeing her for the first time in a decade. The quiet, supportive partner he had called a philosopher had taken her passion, her intelligence, the very qualities he had belittled, and forged them into a weapon more powerful than any he possessed. He had built an empire of code and contracts. She had built an empire of truth and beauty. And at the biggest social event of the year, in front of everyone who mattered, she had just unveiled it. Not with a press release or a flashy presentation, but with a quiet conversation, all while wearing a $2 million gown that was nothing more than a beautiful distraction from her real power. The main event of the evening, the live auction, was meant to be the climax of the gala, a chance for the city's wealthiest to publicly display their generosity. For Diego, it was now a desperate last stand. He had been humiliated socially and outmaneuvered in business. His only remaining card was wealth, raw and overwhelming. He planned to make the night's largest donation, a spectacular headline-grabbing figure that would reassert his dominance and reduce Melanie's triumph to a footnote. The auctioneer, a charismatic man with a rapid-fire delivery, worked the room selling off luxury vacations, rare wines, and unique experiences. Diego sat with Tiffany at their front-row table, brooding. Tiffany was uncharacteristically quiet, scrolling furiously through her phone, her face tight with anxiety. The whispers about Melanie's tribute to her sister had made her a pariah for the moment. Every sympathetic glance thrown Melanie's way felt like an accusation against her. Finally, the grand finale item was announced. "And now, ladies and gentlemen, for our final lot of the evening," the auctioneer boomed. "A truly priceless opportunity, a private one-on-one design consultation and dinner with the master himself, the legendary, the reclusive, Julian Devereaux." A collective gasp went through the room. Devereaux hadn't made a public appearance in 2 decades. This was an unprecedented, almost mythical prize. The auctioneer explained that Devereaux, moved by the gala's cause, had agreed to this one-time exception, with all proceeds going to the charity. Diego saw his opening. This was it. He would buy access to the man who had inadvertently become the symbol of his humiliation. He would own the connection. He would win. "We will start the bidding at $100,000, the auctioneer declared. Hands shot up immediately. 150, 200, 250,000. Diego let the amateurs play. He waited, letting the bidding climb past $500,000. When it slowed at 600,000, he raised his paddle. $1 million, he said, his voice ringing with authority. A hush fell over the room. It was an audacious, powerful bid designed to shut down all competition. But on the other side of the room, a shipping magnate with a point to prove raised his paddle. 1.1 million, Diego countered immediately. 1.5 million. The room buzzed with excitement. This was the spectacle they had been waiting for. The magnate hesitated, conferred with his wife, and reluctantly shook his head. The auctioneer's gavel was raised. $1.5 million going once, going twice. This was his moment of redemption. But before the gavel could fall, the chairwoman of the gala, a graceful woman named Beatrice Vanderbilt, walked onto the stage and held up a hand, speaking quietly to the auctioneer. He nodded his eyes odd and lowered his gavel. "Ladies and gentlemen," Beatrice said, her voice amplified by the microphone, "we have a brief and rather wonderful interruption. While the generosity on display tonight has been truly heartwarming, I have just been informed that we received a donation earlier this evening. A donation made privately without fanfare before the gala even began." She paused for dramatic effect. Diego felt a prickle of unease. "This single donation," Beatrice continued, her voice filled with emotion, "is the largest in the Starlight Gala's 20-year history. It is enough to fully fund the construction and staffing of a new state-of-the-art pediatric neuro research wing at the hospital, which will be named in memory of a young girl who lost her battle with cancer far too soon, the Clara Price Research Pavilion. The name hit Diego like a physical shock. Clara Price. Beatrice smiled warmly. The donor wished to remain anonymous, but in light of her presence here tonight, and with her gracious permission, we feel it is only right to acknowledge her. The $5 million donation was made by the founder of Veritas Art, Mrs. Melanie Price. If Melanie's arrival had caused a shockwave, this was an earthquake. The room erupted not into chatter, but into thunderous, sustained applause. People were rising to their feet, turning to face Melanie, their faces a mixture of awe and profound respect. Her $1.5 million bid was now rendered meaningless, a gaudy display of ego next to an act of transformative, silent philanthropy. He had tried to buy the spotlight, and she had already purchased the entire stage, the building, and the moral soul of the evening. Melanie, looking genuinely surprised by the announcement, simply inclined her head, a humble gesture that only amplified her grace. She had given a fortune in her sister's name and hadn't wanted anyone to know. As Diego sat paralyzed by this final checkmate move, a second more insidious crisis was unfolding at his own table. Tiffany's face had gone sheet white. Her phone was buzzing incessantly. A well-known gossip columnist, a woman Tiffany had snubbed earlier in the evening, just posted a story on her widely read blog. The headline was devastating. The Stafford fiancé's fairy tale passed more fiction than fact. The article, citing multiple sources from her hometown, methodically dismantled Tiffany's carefully constructed identity. She had not graduated summa cum laude from Wharton. She had attended a community college for 2 semesters. She was never a senior brand strategist at a top marketing firm. She had been an unpaid intern who was let go after 3 months. The story included quotes from former colleagues and even a screenshot of her old, unpolished LinkedIn profile before it was scrubbed and replaced with a fabricated history. The news spread through the ballroom with the speed of a digital virus. On phones hidden under tablecloths, the story was being shared, commented on, and dissected. The whispers started again, but this time they were laced with ridicule. "Did you see the whole resume is fake? And he's a tech genius, and he couldn't even run a background check on his own fiancée. He traded in a woman who builds empires for one who builds fairy tales." The facade had not just cracked, it had shattered into a million pieces. Diego was sitting next to a fraud, a woman whose entire value was based on a lie. His judgment, his intelligence, his very perception, all of it was now called into question. He had paraded her as a symbol of his new, upgraded life, and she had just been exposed as a cheap counterfeit. The irony was so thick he could choke on it. He looked across the room at Melanie, now surrounded by admirers, Finch Beaumont, the gala chairwoman. She was bathed in a glow of authentic respect. Then he looked at Tiffany, who was staring at him, her eyes wide with terror and pleading. In that moment, Diego Stafford, the titan of industry, the king of his world, understood the full crushing weight of his defeat. He had lost everything that mattered tonight. The deal, the respect of his peers, his public image, and his own self-deception. He had thrown away a diamond and picked up a piece of glittering glass. The applause, a thunderous wave of validation for Melanie, finally crested and receded, leaving behind a silence at Diego's table that was more damning than any accusation. The air grew thick and heavy with what was unsaid. Around them, the ballroom was a hive of frantic, hushed communication. Phones glowed beneath tablecloths, their screens displaying the ruinous blog post. Glances sharp and fleeting, like thrown knives, cut across the room toward their table before quickly looking away. They were no longer guests. They were a spectacle of disgrace. Tiffany sat frozen, her face a kabuki mask of tragedy, the tears having carved pale channels through her expensive foundation. Her phone, which lay face up on the table, buzzed with a relentless, vicious rhythm. Each vibration a fresh wave of public scorn, another nail in the coffin of her fabricated life. "Diego," she whispered, her voice ragged. She reached for his hand, her touch tentative, desperate. "I can fix this. I'll release a statement. We can sue the columnist for libel. I can explain everything. It got out of hand. I just wanted to be good enough for you." Diego looked at her hand on his, then at her face. He felt nothing. No pity, no sympathy, not even the heat of betrayal. All he felt was a profound, chilling disgust. She was a flawed product, a defective asset. Her lie wasn't the crime. The crime was her incompetence in maintaining it. She had allowed the pristine image he had curated for himself to be contaminated by her cheap, clumsy past. He pulled his hand away slowly. "There is no we," he said, his voice flat and devoid of emotion, the finality of it more brutal than any shout. "You are a liability. I don't tolerate liabilities." He stood, the motion sharp and decisive. His chair scraped against the marble floor, a jarring, ugly sound in the suddenly quiet ballroom. He didn't offer her a hand. He didn't give her a backward glance. He simply turned and began his long walk toward the exit, leaving her to be swallowed by the silent judgment of the room. His stride was long and purposeful, his head held high in a defiant imitation of his usual arrogance. But it was a hollow performance. He could feel the weight of 1,000 eyes on him, could sense the smirks and whispers that followed in his wake. The journey across the ballroom floor was a gauntlet of his own making. He passed a rival tech CEO, a man he'd gloated to just hours earlier, who now gave him a slow, pitying shake of the head. He saw a circle of society women, their faces a mixture of glee and mock sympathy, their whispers ceasing the moment he looked their way. This was what failure felt like, not a sudden crash, but a slow, agonizing corrosion of deference into contempt. He was halfway to the grand staircase, his escape almost in sight, when a figure stepped into his path, blocking his way as surely as a brick wall. It was Alistair Finch. The British investor stood with an air of immense stillness, his silver hair catching the light, his eyes holding no warmth, only a clear, piercing judgment. "Stafford," Finch said. His voice was not loud, but it cut through Diego's haze of fury and humiliation. "A word of advice, if I may." Diego bristled, forced to a halt. "I'm not in the mood for advice, Alistair." "I imagine not," Finch replied, his tone dry as dust. "But you'll want to hear this. For years, I've watched men like you operate. You worship at the altar of disruption. You measure success in market caps and brute force. But you consistently overlook the most valuable asset of all. It is not capital, nor technology, nor market share. It is integrity." Finch took a small step closer, his gaze unwavering. "It's the bedrock upon which lasting empires are built. It cannot be bought, it cannot be leveraged, and it cannot be acquired in a hostile takeover. It must be earned, and once lost." He paused, letting the weight of the word hang between them. "It is almost impossible to recover. You would do well to remember that." Before Diego could form a retort, Finch executed his final devastating maneuver. With a curt, dismissive nod, he turned his back on Diego and walked directly to where Melanie stood, preparing for her own departure. The move was a physical manifestation of the evening's power shift, a literal turning away from the disgraced past and toward the brilliant future. Diego stood rooted to the spot, watching as Finch, the man he had courted for months, approached his ex-wife with a reverence he had never been shown. "Mrs. Price," Finch said, his voice now warm with genuine admiration as he took her hand. "An absolute honor. My office will be in touch first thing Monday morning. I anticipate a very long and very profitable partnership." "Thank you, Alistair," Melanie replied, her voice the epitome of grace. I look forward to it. The sight of it, the handshake, the mutual respect, the sealing of a deal that should have been his, was the final breaking point. The carefully controlled dam of his composure shattered. He had to understand. He pushed through a cluster of gawking guests, his movements clumsy with desperation, and confronted her at the base of the staircase. Melanie. The name was a raw, guttural sound, torn from his throat. She turned to face him fully. She was no longer a ghost from his past, or a stranger in a beautiful gown. She was an immovable force, her serenity, the calm eye of the storm that had just torn his life apart. The thousands of tiny diamonds on her Devereux gown seemed to glitter like a triumphant constellation, mocking him with their cold, celestial light. Was this all for revenge? He demanded, the question bursting from him, a desperate plea for an explanation his ego could process. The company, the dress, Finch, all of it. Did you spend a year plotting this? This elaborate scheme just to humiliate me? He needed it to be about him. The alternative, that he was merely a footnote in her story, was simply incomprehensible. Melanie looked at him, and a profound sadness softened the powerful composure of her features. It was the look of a teacher watching a student fail the simplest, most fundamental lesson. "Oh, Diego," she said, her voice quiet, imbued not with malice, but with a weary clarity. "You still don't get it, do you? After all this, you still believe the world revolves around you, that every action is either for you or against you." And she took a single deliberate step closer, her presence commanding the space between them. This was never about revenge. It was about resurrection. He saw her take a slow breath, gathering the story of her past year into a single powerful truth. When you left me, you did more than just end our marriage. You tried to erase me. You took my history. You took my confidence. You took the voice that told me I had value outside of being your wife. You told the world I wasn't enough, and for a long, quiet time I believed you. I was a ghost in my own life, haunting the rooms you had abandoned. Her gaze was unblinking, forcing him to see the truth he had so long ignored. This past year wasn't about destroying you. It was about rebuilding me, from the foundation up. Her voice gained strength, each word a carefully laid brick in her new reality. Veritas art was born from my passion for truth and beauty, the very things you always dismissed as a quaint hobby. The donation was for my sister Clara, a defining part of my soul you never bothered to learn. And this dress, she glanced down at the magnificent creation, is not a weapon. It is a gift from a dear friend who saw my strength long before I could see it myself. It is a tribute to the memory of a love that was real and pure. She held his gaze, her final judgment, both merciful and absolute. This evening wasn't a plot against you, Diego. It was my announcement to myself, first and foremost, that I am no longer a supporting character in your story. I am the author of my own. She looked past him, then toward the wreckage he had made of his own life, embodied by the weeping figure of Tiffany. You surround yourself with reflections of your own ego, hoping their praise will convince you of your own greatness. But a hall of mirrors is still just an empty room. I truly hope for your sake that one day you find something real to put in it. With that, she turned. She did not storm off or flee. She simply ascended the grand staircase, her movements unhurried and regal. The train of Clara's constellation flowed behind her like a river of starlight, a breathtaking sight. The entire ballroom watched in silence, a collective, unspoken acknowledgement that they were witnessing not an ending, but a coronation. She never looked back. Diego Stafford stood alone, a statue in the middle of the ballroom. The buzzing chatter of the crowd slowly returned, but it sounded distant and distorted the noise of a world to which he no longer fully belonged. He was a king in a fallen kingdom, left with nothing but the bitter ashes of his pride, haunted by the devastating clarity of her final words. Melanie pushed through the heavy doors and stepped out into the cool, crisp embrace of the New York night. The air was clean, a welcome antidote to the cloying atmosphere of the gala. The city skyline blazed before her, a familiar panorama that suddenly felt new, a landscape of infinite possibility. She took a deep, shuddering breath, a breath of pure, unadulterated freedom. The weight of the past, the grief, the betrayal, the crushing inadequacy had finally been lifted. The magnificent gown, which had served as her armor for the battle, now felt light like a second skin. Its purpose was served. Her work was just beginning. Veritas Art needed her. The Clara Price Research Pavilion needed to be built. She smiled a genuine private smile. She had walked into the fire of her past and emerged, not burned but forged. Her new dawn was here, and it was brighter than all the city lights combined. And so the Starlight Gala ended, not with a bang, but with the quiet, earth-shattering triumph of a woman who refused to be forgotten. Melanie Price walked into that ballroom as an ex-wife and walked out as a legend. This wasn't just a story about a revenge dress. It was a story about reclaiming one's narrative. It's a testament to the fact that true power isn't about the noise you make or the money you flaunt, but about the silent, unshakable strength you build when no one is watching. It's about turning your deepest pains into your greatest passions and realizing that your worth is never ever determined by the person who leaves you behind. What did you think of Melanie's incredible transformation? Were you cheering for her every step of the way?